Washington football. Woo! Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Burgundy Zone, a special edition Wednesday episode. I will not be joined by my two co-hosts for this one. We are joined by a very special guest, friend of the show, Mr. Ryan Fowler, to talk about the scheduling conflicts, which is the title of tonight's episode. Ryan, how are you doing on this Wednesday, brother?
I'm doing well, Kyle, and always appreciate you having me on, man.
Absolutely, man. And I know that it's all still up in the air. I almost have the literal whole schedule written out already. It seems like these leaks are, I think Andy Burrows from the UK said it's like the Titanic with all the leaks of the schedule coming out, which is perfect. Not primetime games, but 8 national games. You know, because a lot of people don't remember that the 425 games are also considered national games as well. But, you know, you have the Christmas Day game and everything. How big is what is it an indicator of, Ryan?
Yeah, it's first off, it's nice. It's always, I'll say this, people are always going to find something to complain about,
Yeah.
Kyle, which is unfortunate. But
Yeah.
it's going to be really nice. October, November, you're not going to have a single 1 o'clock game, which is very unique to what we've been used to, of course, in Washington. But it's going to be kind of nice, maybe to sit around on a Sunday or a Monday or Thursday, whenever the Commanders play out, even in Madrid, Spain, against the Dolphins at the Bernabeu, which is going to be absolutely unbelievable. That atmosphere is going to be crazy. I think it's indicative, though, Kyle, to your question of just where this franchise is and where it's going. Where they were 17, 18 months ago to where they are now with the new stadium coming and the draft in 2027. You got a superstar under center, arguably one of the top quarterbacks in the entire NFL. For me, the top quarterback in the NFC. So it's just indicative of where this team is, what they did last year in year one, and what's really to come for this franchise. Because the NFL, bottom line, Kyle, it's a business, as
Yeah.
is all these major sports outlets and these leagues, and they want to see the best product on the field and the major superstars, and that's what Jaden Daniels is as the headliner, and what these other guys and the opportunities that they're going to get under a national spotlight. So I'm really excited, as I know you are too.
Yeah, and I saw that Jaden Daniels right now number one selling jersey in the NFL to kind of put that over the top there. And obviously going to Madrid, I know the UK boys are very happy about that. I've been trying to convince my wife to let that happen, and she's just not doing it, you know. But what would you say if you had to pick which one matchup that you are circling this season? Projection, because obviously at 8 o'clock tonight is when we'll actually get confirmed.
Yeah, I think it's against Patrick Mahomes. I really
Okay.
do. I know that may be easy to say, Kyle, but he's a first ballot Hall of Famer if he hung him up today, and he may go down arguably as the best to ever do it when he does hang him up. And I think as of now, where we've talked about the Kansas City Chiefs for so long, as far as just saying 15 can get them anywhere they want, and they have a chance to lift the Lombardi as long as he's back there. Seeing what we saw from Jaden last year to where it didn't matter who the Commanders faced, despite the roster holes, you always had a chance with him under center, and you will as long as he's under center for the Burgundy goal moving forward. So I think the Chiefs, I believe it's a Monday night game in the
Yep.
middle of the year, is the game I have circled for me, and facing off against them is going to be really, really fun in that spotlight for both those guys. And I know you remember probably a few years ago when the Chiefs and the Rams played and it was like a 55-54 type of
Yeah.
shootout. Maybe we get that some sort of craziness. But I think that's the one I have circled with 15 against 5 is definitely one that's going to be really fun to watch.
Absolutely. 55-0 on our end would be absolutely perfect
That'd be
to
awesome.
hear. But obviously with these primetime games, it's definitely a moment for Washington to whip out their meat on the table. You know, like you can't hide from this. They've done exactly what they needed to get this sort of privilege to be
Yeah.
on the big screen. Now, do you think that Washington is ready for it?
I do. I do. Again, seeing what they did last year in moments to where I look at Tampa, I look at Detroit, and I know things didn't go their way in Philly, in the NFC Championship game. If we could take away some of those fumbles, I think it's a little bit of a different ball game there, specifically in the second half. But I think they absolutely did what they needed to do. And as you used a great word, Kyle, and that is a privilege to be on this type of platform. Now it's about showing up, right? I'm sure every other of the 31 teams is hoping that Jaden Daniels has a sophomore slump. Everyone's bringing up the CJ Stroud stuff, but I
Yeah.
guess a lot of those people haven't watched a lot of the tape or really seen the type of skill sets that CJ has or Jaden has and how they won in the different offenses. They're different players, in my honest opinion, and I see that on tape. So I think overall they did earn the opportunity. Now it's about not really, crapping the bed and laying in it. It's about taking advantage of it and not just being a 1 year darling in prime time, similar to last few years, what we saw with, even the Trevor Lawrence Jaguars a few years ago, where all the attention was around them. Now it's about continuing to elevate yourself as an organization. Doesn't mean you have to be in the NFC Championship game every single year, but now that you have this platform, the NFL as a whole is expecting a lot for you. And I know that this city is really buzzing around this team. It's a really exciting time to be following the Burgundy Gold for sure.
Yeah, I do find it hilarious when they talk about the sophomore slump for C.J. Stroud, where they were picking in the low 20s. Still,
Yeah,
back in my
right,
day, Ryan, when you had a sophomore slump, you were picking top 10, top five,
right,
typically,
right.
right? You know what I mean?
Yep.
But my next question for you, obviously, rookie minicamp just went down. And I want to kind of hear about what have you been hearing out of rookie minicamp, if you could give me and our listeners some tidbits of what happened.
Yeah, I'll say this. I love this time of year. I know a lot of the attention, Kyle, is on the schedule release. It's and then moving towards training camp now, post draft, and what the preseason's going to hold. But what I love about this time of year, and really what Dan Quinn and his staff have built, at least now moving into year two, is development and preaching that. And I think one thing that I always look at with development is what the Eagles have done with Jeff Stoutland as their offensive line coach, where they take guys with tools and traits and you develop those players and to reach their performance ceilings. Now, with Washington, now with rookie minicamp, you're bringing in guys, of course, that were drafted, whether you're top 100 guys or your late day three guys like a Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt, or you're a guy like Carlin Vigors, the DB from Louisiana Monroe, that fits their profile at 6'2", 200 pounds. And I had a couple conversations with some scouts in Washington that said that he impressed during rookie minicamp, and he could be another DB like we saw with Tyler Owens
Mm.
last year from Texas Tech that makes this 53-man roster. He's going to have some competition, of course, with guys like Fentrell Cypress and Robert McDaniel from Jackson State. But really, Carlin has been one guy in the last few weeks or last few days, excuse me, post minicamp that really stood out in some of these conversations as far as what he can do right away, looking at his size, looking at the length, even specifically scouts mentioned his tape against Texas and the Isaiah Bonds of the world, Matthew Golden's early on in the year last year for the Warhawks, where he really stood out. And that's a guy I think to continue to watch in the summer months where he's going to be working mostly with the threes, potentially the fours, and going to be a guy that plays a lot of snaps in the preseason, Kyle. But if there's one player that really rose in conversations, it's Carlin Vigors and then even Ja'Cory Brooks, the receiver from Louisville, as a
Okay.
former highly touted recruit that was at Alabama in his prior years.
Yeah, I saw a little bit of his tape, which there was a lot to take away from, but it definitely seems like there was stuff to work on. Hands
Yeah.
were definitely a thing when watching him, but we are only here for you to make a name for yourself, so to speak, of course. But I want to talk about what do you think's going to happen? How do you think Luke McCaffrey fits himself into this offense? They traded for Debo Samuel. Obviously, they drafted Lane, my boy Jalen Lane at Virginia Tech. But with I saw on the internet that Jalen Lane had impressed at rookie minicamp, and I understand it's only 2 days. It's kind of
Yeah.
easy to impress in that sense. Have you heard anything about that? And then also, how do you think Luke McCaffrey fits himself into this offense?
I wouldn't be surprised if Jalen Lane outplays Luke McCaffrey in camp. I wouldn't be
Mm,
surprised at all. And I think ultimately, Kyle, this is what Adam Peters wants in the building is competition. Luke, you were the 100th overall selection last year. You got to add competition in the building. And I think with Jalen coming off rookie minicamp, and I'm glad you mentioned that because he did have a good few days. And I know it's not full 11 on 11 work, and they're not out there in pads, and they're not cracking. You can really separate guys when you start to crack at the NFL level. But when you look at what Jalen can do ultimately in first impressions, as it is with everything in this world, the ability to just align everywhere, inside out, designated touches, be a special teams core contributor, which he's going to be, that's a guy that's going to be hard to keep off of the football field. So for that group of receivers, Kyle, behind Terry and Debo, how is that going to separate themselves with the Noah Browns of the world and KJ Osborne's even back? Jalen Lane's there. You bring in Michael Gallup. What is he going to be? Does he still have some juice in the tank? And it's nice to have Jaden Daniels throwing you the football where he can elevate you, but from a parallel skill set perspective, as far as I'm Cliff Kingsbury and I'm trying to scheme up this game plan for the Eagles late in the year, and we're trying to win the division, who can I put on the field? Is it Luke McCaffrey or is it Jalen Lane to scheme up touches? And I think if I had to guess right now, It's a close battle. It really is. And I would not, again, as my point earlier, Kyle, I wouldn't be surprised if Jalen Lane outplays Luke McCaffrey specifically because of his explosiveness with the ball in his hands and the ability to take it to distance, because you just cannot keep guys that can do that off the field.
Yeah, and Ryan, we talked so much before the draft that obviously this is the first time we've talked to you since before the draft. But the last four games of Washington's schedule is New York, at the Eagles, Dallas, and then home for the Eagles to wrap up for the division, which is a gauntlet to end the season, which is music to my ears that they added Josh Connerly, which weirdly enough, I uploaded a film breakdown of him the day before the draft. We ended up taking him. And the one takeaway I have from Josh Connerly is he just does everything right. It's
Mm.
not like a real wow guy. Like it's not like a DeJuan Jones or others where you're going to see him really just manhandling and throwing people, but he just gets his job done in a very quiet manner, almost like John Wick in a way. Do you think I just based off his body type, Ryan? I feel like he's going. Even if you have him going into competition against Brandon Coleman, I think his body size, being at 311 pounds, is probably better fit for tackle than guard right away.
Correct. Correct. I would place him at tackle right away. I know Andrew Wiley's still in the building, but look, the athleticism and the footwork in Connolly's frame, and I think he still has his best football to still be played. I think he's a slot in right away at right tackle, and I think Brandon Coleman, his ability with bumpers to either side of him, I really like that ability as a guy that can pull, that can get to the second level, really good hips. He's strong in the upper half and drives his legs in his lower half. Like we're starting to really look at this front five, Kyle, and say we got some big boys that can get after people and
Right.
set the tone a little bit, because they are. I expect them to run the ball a little bit more, at least better this year, and create some alleys more so than what we saw the back end of last year, where it was consistently, is it going to be Jaden Daniels or who is it going to be? Right. So
Yep.
I think when you look at Josh Connerly, everyone always is, every way you look, of course, is going to be, well, what about the rep against Mike Green at the Senior Bowl? Well, show the other reps, show the one-on-ones, or why don't you just show the Big Ten game against Abdul Carter, where, excuse my French, but he kicked Abdul Carter's ass a little bit, and he's going to see him in week one. So people watch that tape a little bit and do the full dive before you get one clip of what Josh can do. He's a hell of a player. I think he's wired right in between the ears as far as wherever he wants to align, at guard or at tackle. He's going to play his tail off. And I think learning behind a guy, whether it's Wiley, whether it's Coleman, whether it's Laramie Tunsil, Sam Cosmi as well in the building, that is only going to help this young man, because I think he has a Pro Bowl type of future along this front five, whether it's at guard or whether it's at tackle, specifically because of his athletic profile, and to get out in space and expand this playbook a little bit.
Yeah, Josh Connerly took a page out of the wide receivers playbook after that Mike Green rep, and reportedly he said the sun was in his eyes, is what he said.
Like that.
Now, Ryan, I want to kind of talk about, do you think that Connerly will have an easy transition going to right tackle?
I don't. Well, I'll say this: it's easier said than done for sure. Switching sides.
Right.
I know he played that spot even back in high school as well, but that's years ago, and he's never faced a T.J. Watt or Miles Garrett or any of the Eagles guys, Giants guys. Micah Parsons of the world in Dallas, and the NFL side of things. Usually, your right tackle is the Talise Fuaga types, right? Where you just want to live on that linear plane and get downhill as a road grader, right? We look at right now with Wiley and Tunsil as far as the differences in pass probability, there is a drastic difference. But if you have not as great a drop off with Tunsil and Connerly, to where right now I think Connerly's ability in pass pro is a little bit better than as a run blocker, which makes me also think about the scheme in which Kingsbury wants to deploy this year, which is he's going to put the ball in Jaden Daniels' hands and sling it around a little bit. So as of right now, again, the transition is never easy going from either side, left to right, right to left, or even to the interior or interior outward, which you see on rare occasions. But overall, I think he has, again, the athleticism to do so and the technical ability in his upper half, where a lot of the hand placement and the punch timing in his game is advanced where he is in his career right now.
Absolutely. And the compare and contrast with Arianti Ursary going against Abdul Carter, where Abdul Carter beat him to the inside a lot, and he
Yes, he
tried
did.
that. He tried that a lot on Connerly, and just was not happening, of course, which is music to my ears. And obviously, we want to see games like Arizona happen more. But it's not even like against a team like Arizona, Ryan. It's much more so go against like the Raven kind of defensive front and getting more than 60 yards rushing, actually making it a sustainable run play. And so I think that that's probably the best bet that Washington went with in the first round. We're all talking edge, but I'm glad that that we got surprised a little bit. But the
Yeah.
second round pick, Trey Amos, I compared him a lot to Josh Connolly in the sense that these guys should not have been here. Like
Mhm.
after watching like Trey Amos, I was drinking through a fire hose early on in the draft process when I watched him. It wasn't until after we drafted him that I actually looked into detail and was like, Ryan, I think he's the best on the ball corner in this draft class.
Yeah, I was surprised that he actually got out of night one. I tweeted it a couple hours before that I expected him to go. And so obviously a lot of value there in the 60s for him. And one thing I like about Trey is not just the fundamental coverage ability, Kyle, which you just mentioned. It's his ability to succeed, which he did in the college level at three different programs,
Mm,
and the ability to come on the outside and just win and win and win. And in
yeah.
this defense right now, where I cannot sit here, and I won't be able to say it until we see Marshawn Lattimore back on the field. I just can't sit here and say that Marshawn's the one and potentially Mikey's the two. And I know we talked about potentially, do I like Mikey on the outside or on the inside? I do like him on the inside. They want Trey on the outside. And as of right now, I think Trey Amos has a potential ability when we go into this fall. If Marshawn Lattimore does not improve in the summertime and showcases his dominance as what they traded for, he could potentially be Washington's premier CB1 on
Mm,
the outside as we go into the fall. And I think
wow.
that may be actually a potential concern. And if you look at AJ Brown, Devonta Smith, they're probably going to be licking their chops, right? CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens now in Dallas. And of course, that kid Malik Neighbors up there in New York's a hell of a ball player.
Right.
That's something I'm going to be following this summer because I have to see it from Marshawn Lattimore because I just don't know. It was the hamstring that bad? I don't know. I sure hope not because you can't say anything bad about Adam Peters, around this city. You can't. But as of right now, that's a negative in this defense and a guy you expect to be a Pro Bowler, but he's got to be better. Or really, Trey Amos has a potential clear path for me at 6'1", 200 pounds with his ability to be the premier CB1 on the outside.
He definitely showcased that ability at Ole Miss. Watching him, and obviously he followed his Alabama defensive coordinator.
Yep.
There's been other reports of why he left Alabama and everything. It's kind of ridiculous. But the question I have for you next, in regards to Kane Medrano, when I watch him, because we kind of talked about Jalen Lane. If you want to talk, actually, let's talk about my boy. All right, because I was
Good.
on the radio back in like April 15th saying there's two Jalen's in this draft class I love, Jalen Knoll and then Jalen Lane. And of course, we went and got him. And not only as a wide receiver with just the speed and the attributes and being on a lackluster offense, but the guy is a very, very good punt returner as well. And that was definitely a need I had circled on early on.
Absolutely. And first things first, when it comes to Jalen Lane and the punt return, kick return game, you got to have it now. Kyle, I know you remember Brandon Banks.
Yeah.
Man, I know you remember Brandon Banks. He was so fun. But Brandon Banks was, 135 pounds soaking wet, and he still weighed probably 35 pounds heavier than Manuel Forbes at that point in time. But still, you can carve a rollout for yourself now with these new rules, especially on kickoff. And Jalen's going to be a guy right away. Again, we talked about it earlier with Luke, but to be a wide receiver three, wide receiver four for this offense, a line inside out, do some similar-ish type of things that Debo Samuel can do. He's got great hands. I thought he was underutilized this year in the
Yeah.
Virginia Tech offense. Again, I put it on my Twitter earlier on in the process that he had second round grades from teams. He went to in the fourth round, so there is some value there as far as this how this process went on for him. I think he's a hell of a player, and I think he's someone that's going to compete and take advantage of every single touch. So I'm right there with you as far as I like the player. I can't wait to see him how he progresses into training camp, into the preseason, because I think he's going to be a guy in certain moments this year where you're going to look up and you see him run down the field and say, "Who is that kid?" That's going to be Jalen Lane. He's going to give himself some opportunities to make some plays this year.
Absolutely. Number 83, Jalen the Fast Lane. Make sure you remember that one. And then Kane Medrano, obviously at a UCLA. We all know about the tackling issues. He's a former wide receiver that converted. Has the body type, has the measurables. I know it's comparable to Fred Warner when he was coming out. But when I watch his tape, Ryan, what stands out the most is how he's able to get after the passer in a quick manner. You see that burst in real time. I know John Keim and others have talked about the pass coverage ability, but to be honest, I find him more as like a Frankie Louvu backup. Do you think that they utilize Kane Medrano in a three linebacker set this season, or do you think that's something that's more so going to go to Jordan McGee?
Yeah, I think Jordan's going to probably have that role early on, Kyle. But again, more competition, and I'm right there with you as far as Kane's ability in coverage, which you got to have guys to eliminate tight ends up the seam and run with
Yep.
backs in space. He can do that. He tackles his tail off, so that's going to be the path to snaps right away is on teams. But really, Jordan McGee and Dom Hampton right away, Kane Madrano is going to be right in their rearview mirror. 100%. This guy can run, he can play, he can tackle. I want to see a little bit more consistency in the open field, just slowing down just a little bit. And then you mentioned the pass rush ability, like a Frankie Louvu, those hybrid types of players. We saw last year trying to make it work with a guy like Jamin Davis as far as from an off-ball backer down to the edge. That doesn't mean Kane's going to play consistently as a wide nine or anything like that, but just the ability to potentially win on the outside with your edge rushers, the big physical guys they brought in, like a Dietrich Wise, and then have a guy like a Madrano or potentially a Frankie Louvu over the A and B gaps. Let Bobby potentially take a series off and let him fly downhill. Add a Jordan McGee in the three linebacker sets over the middle of the field, pick up those crossers. You're starting to have a lot of athletes within your front seven. And for me, I'm not Joe Witt, but more athletes is it gives you more of a chance to cover more space and provides you some more unique opportunities to be unique in what you're doing conceptually on your defense.
Yeah, absolutely love to hear it. And obviously, it wasn't until late that Carson Schwarzenegger and the UCLA defense came up because I talked to you. I couldn't find anything. And of course, like 4 days before the draft is when they started uploading the UCLA defense film, which was unfortunate. But I saw Schwarzenegger there, and obviously he comes off the tape. But the Kane Madrano speed is a legit thing. It's just being able to, I know Ken Norton will be able to get the most out of him.
Yeah.
The last draft pick in Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, this guy is probably, if you were to talk about fantasy football, this is like getting Adrian Peterson the year after his ACL with pick 12 before he had that crazy year. Kind of talk to about Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. What have you heard about him at his time at Arizona and before, and what his expectations are in this defense? Do you think he's going to see some time immediately?
Man, arguably my favorite pick of this class. I now not every pick's gonna hit, and if I'm wrong on Ja'Cory, then I'm wrong on Ja'Cory. This was someone that was really brought to my attention, Kyle, November, December when he wasn't playing
Mm.
for Arizona. The trend there was a waiver issue with going from Mexico State to Arizona. There was nothing with grades. There was nothing along those lines. I have a very good relationship with Ja'Cory and his representatives. There was nothing along those lines. It's just behind the scenes of NCAA. Can't get into everything there. But as far as who he is as a player and how he took advantage of this pre-draft process and what the Commanders look for in individuals and football players. This guy went to the Hula Bowl again, 0 snaps. Arizona was the practice squad running back this year to give them looks at as a nod to his competition. Went to the Hula Bowl in Orlando, had like 30 or 40 family members drive in from Montgomery, Alabama to watch him compete. Dominated there, got an invite to Shrine out of Frisco, dominated throughout the week, and then was the offensive game MVP. Then he was expected to go in the fourth, fifth round, goes in the seventh. Commanders get a ton of value there. And there were some opportunities there for him that even his representative said that some teams were going to say, hey, we were going to take you in the sixth if you're there. Well, things change, right? And boards change. Now he goes to the Commanders. And when I look at this running back group to where everybody's back basically from last year and everybody had some sort of role, but there is not an individual in this running backs room right now with the vision, the footwork, and the creativity and the open field elusiveness to consistently create like Ja'Cory has. I have not seen it with Brian Robinson. Austin Eckler's not 25 years old anymore. And I think of Jeremy McNichols and Chris Rodriguez as sometimes those fill-ins, just a couple carries here and there, and specifically Chris at the goal line. I like those guys. I like all four guys. But I need some players that can consistently create if the alleys are not there along the line of scrimmage. I think this is a player like years ago we saw with Rashard Ross that absolutely took over the preseason and made the roster. I think this is a kid in Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt as we get to training camp. He's going to be somebody that potentially earns some reps with the ones. He's going to take over in the preseason and earn himself some touches in year one. I'm not saying RB1, not saying that RB2, but I think he's absolutely someone that's going to be on the football field because his skill set excites me. He can absolutely play ball, and he's entering the league with fresh tread on the tires after not playing all of 2024.
Yeah, and if he definitely does take a lot of snaps, it would help with Austin Eckler with returning of kicks, of course, if he was able to take some weight off of him. Don't want to put him in too many situations. But Ryan, to wrap this up, only a couple more questions for you. Do you know if Marshawn Lattimore came to involuntary workouts, voluntary
I,
workouts?
I do not. I do not. But I think we can both agree, Kyle, that's we're expecting a lot from him and big questions surrounding him this summer.
Yeah, especially the way it ended and everything, you would expect that somebody to buy in, right? But that's the one kind of difficulty if you are going to go trade or free agency when trying to build this culture, right? Like last season, I think they had a 100% rate coming in, and obviously this time around you traded for more and got more, and not 100% that everyone is going to buy into that kind of identity, but hopefully Marshawn Lattimore is able to come to play this year.
Yeah.
What is one area that Washington improved in the most this offseason?
Offensive line.
Okay.
Offensive line. I
I
think
mean,
it's
that's easy. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll go somewhere different. I'll go corner. I'll go corner. I think this is overall the secondary. I like Jonathan Jones. I like Will Harris. I think Trey Amos is a player that's going to come in and try to compete for that CB1 spot that I mentioned earlier. When you're adding more depth like that and you're adding more top end talent with a guy again that I thought was going to go in the back end of round one, that's a guy that's going to add more competition on the back end. And I don't think that there's a secondary right now in Washington that a lot of people are scared of. People think that Mike Sanders still's too small. They think Marshawn Lattimore's over the hill. Jonathan Jones is probably beyond his past with his days in New England. Same with Will Harris. And really, what is Quan Martin or what is Percy Butler? I think this is a young group that's going to make some plays, littered with veterans like Will Harris, Mark Lattimore, and Jonathan Jones. So I'll say the secondary overall, and then offensive line I know is easy. And then I'll give a shout out as well to Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt because I do think he's going to improve the running back room and provide some competition there.
Absolutely. The only reason I said it was easy, just because obviously they traded for Laramie Tunsil. They used the first rounder on Josh Connerly. Just saying in my mind, I'm like, oh yeah, of course,
That's
right.
boring. That's
But
too boring. Yeah,
but
that's boring.
even wide receiver, you could say the same thing, right? Because they added more into that breadth. But even with losing Diami Brown. Last question I have for you, Ryan. What are the expectations for Washington this season?
That's a great question. I'm not going to sit here and say it's NFC Championship game. I'm not. I know year
It's
one.
time.
I know, man. It's hopefully in the next 3 to 4 years, we can sit here talking about the Commanders lifting their fourth Lombardi trophy and putting that thing out in Ashburn. That'd be great. I think the expectations right now, as the floor, is to make the playoffs. Whether you're winning the East, we know every year the division champion changes. I would not be surprised at all if the Commanders win the East this year. I've told a lot of people up here in the Philly area and people on the Philly beat, I said, yeah, you better be glad that you won last year because that kid number 5 in Washington is coming for this division title and going to take over the NFC here a little bit. I'm not just saying that because my bias. Just watch the tape. The tape never lies on what he can do. So I think the expectations, the floor is to make the playoffs. Continue to build on this foundation. You added a lot of good veterans. You added some young talent. You built on a rookie class from last year. So again, the floor is the playoffs, and we'll see what happens from there once we get to the postseason and everybody's 0-0, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, it's funny. Today I worked across from the link at the Navy Yard, and yesterday or 2 days ago I was in South Philly, and one of my project managers told me, he's like, "You're going to South Philly with them, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Well, make sure you don't wear any of your Washington gear." I was like, "Come on, man." He's like, "No, man, I'm serious. Like, you gotta be careful in that South area." But I know all about the Philly area and
Yeah,
how
I was
much
gonna
they
say.
dislike us.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Kyle, I'll even tell you a story. When I was 2018, when I was with Washington, Terry McLaurin's first game with Washington up there, the whole Case Keenum thing blew it up against the Eagles in his first ever game. I remember going up there, right? And I remember them saying, oh my gosh, I guess Larry Michael and Tony Wiley, who I worked under there in Washington, they said, "Hey, don't wear any Washington gear as you work your way into the press box." I said, "Oh, whatever. I'm not, worried about these Philly fans." And I said, "No, seriously, don't wear anything in the 60, 70-yard stretch." So I got out and I didn't have anything, Redskins at the time. And I'm walking around and seeing people there was crazy stuff around what I don't even want to get into with the Sean Taylor stuff and things that these Philly
Yeah,
fans.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It was actually disgusting. I'm sure you probably remember that.
The coffin,
Rick
yeah.
Scott stuff. Yeah, it's crazy, but it's nuts. It's nuts up there with Philly. They're passionate, but I will say this: I do live in the Philly area up here. I'm about 40 minutes away from the stadium. They're very passionate about their fans up here, and I hope some Philly fans are watching this to make their skin tingle a little bit. They have absolutely no clue what's going on a football field, baseball field, basketball court, hockey rink. They're passionate. They like to yell, but it's a whole lot of white noise, and they have absolutely zero idea what in the world they're watching.
Dude, I wholeheartedly agree with you. Here in Southern Delaware, I'm always making the trip up there, and it seems like I'm
Yeah,
going to a different world, Ryan. Before
right.
before you get out of here, just like to plug your social media handle and your show, brother.
Of course. Yeah, Commanding the Huddle episodes come out once a week here in the off season. We'll get into the schedule preview here. I'll drop an episode tomorrow once the official schedule comes out tonight, away from the leaks I know you're seeing as well, Kyle. And then I'm on Twitter if you don't follow me there already, _Ryan Fowler. And then my work, as always, can be found at the Draft Network.
My man, I can't thank you enough, Ryan. Go and enjoy your Wednesday, sir, and enjoy this schedule release.
Of course. Thanks as always, Kyle. Talk soon, man.
Our brother. All right, everybody, we just spoke with the man, Mr. Ryan Fowler. Always appreciate Ryan's time. Yeah, the leaks have been crazy regarding this schedule. Before we were joined by our next guest here, just wanted to rip it off real quick. Week 1, this is the projected. This is just what I've gotten from Twitter. I got my guy Go Mando on Twitter uploaded this. There's a handful that you can verifiably say is happening. Week 1 against the Giants, which is perfect. Week 2 at the Packers on Thursday Night Football. Week 3 would be home versus the Raiders. Week 4 at Atlanta. Week 5 at the Chargers. Week 6 at home versus the Bears on Monday Night Football, which is perfect. Week 7 at Dallas at 4:25. Week 8 at Chiefs Monday Night Football. Seahawks at home for Sunday Night Football. I know my coworker's going to that one. Week 10 versus Detroit at 4:25. Week 11 at Miami. This is in Madrid in Spain at 9:30 a.m. Week 12, the bye week. Week 13 versus the Broncos, a Sunday Night Football. Week 14 at Minnesota. Week 15 at New York. Week 16 at Eagles. Week 17, home versus Dallas on Christmas Day, which I know that we're all saying we all want the gift of a Commanders W on Christmas Day versus Dallas. We all want it. We all want it. And then the last week of the season, week 18, versus the Eagles at home, which that time and day is supposed to be determined based on how they do. Now we are rejoined by guests that we haven't had in about a year or so, Mr. Arif Hasan. How are you doing on this beautiful Wednesday, sir?
Hey, man, I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
Doing fantastic. It's scheduled release day, of course,
Yeah.
and last year, Washington had nothing but 1 p.m. games, like literally nothing but. This time around, we are the prime time pimps, you could say, with 8 what it seems like nationally televised games. We are really pumping out in that
8?
regard. That's what I'm seeing.
Wow. Okay, because I think last year the Chiefs, of course, the Chiefs led the league with like 7.
Yeah.
8's crazy.
Well,
Wow.
that is also saying like the Saturday game would be considered
Right.
one possibly. Obviously the Christmas Day one against Dallas, which could be 4:30. Of course, it wouldn't be considered like prime time. You know what I mean?
Sure. But that's still quite the upgrade for the national perception for the Washington Commanders. Well deserved, but like quite the upgrade.
Absolutely, and which is what my question was going to be to you, sir. And of all the leaks that have come about, what would you say is probably your favorite matchup for Washington? Just not just for Washington, but as a viewer.
Oh, that's really so obviously Chargers Chiefs, that's going to be exciting. That just is like what it is, right? So I like that a lot. I think the fact that the NFL has decided to put all of these meaningful divisional games in the final weeks of the season, those are great. It's really difficult to like pick one that I love. Vikings
Right.
Packers, for example, something I'm familiar with. That's going to be a week 18 game. That hopefully is pretty meaningful. Or if you're a Vikings fan, maybe it's not meaningful at all. The Packers just, crapped out, right? But um but no, I like that a lot. I kind of wish the international games had juice. It feels like these international games aren't very good matchups. I mean, the Vikings are playing in 2 of them, and they're against the Steelers and the Browns, neither of whom have a quarterback that people are confident in. I mean, the Steelers might not even have the quarterback that they're going to have on the roster yet. The Vikings already beat Aaron Rodgers in London, so I don't know if that's
Right.
a necessary matchup. And then I think the Germany game looks to be kind of garbage, so that's unfortunate that we're treating the international viewers to some of these subpar matchups. But the flip side of that is
Don't
that we
forget
get
about
some
the
great.
Commanders going up against the Dolphins in Madrid.
Okay, actually, that game is going to be super hype. First, because Spain, right? I
Right.
think that's going to be great. Um, but second, I mean, you've got some teams. I think these are 2 teams that we actually don't know a ton about.
Right.
We've got legitimate reasons to be excited about both, of course. But like, we don't know if the Dolphins are going to remain, being an exciting offense. It feels like they fell off a good chunk last year. Obviously, the Commanders have had one really outstanding season. We don't know if they can sustain that, especially like we need to know if that offensive line is genuinely improved. They made some investments. I believe what they traded for Laramie Tunsil, right? That was
Yes.
an outstanding move. Like hopefully that'll help. Um, but there's injuries along that Miami offensive line and that offense. We don't know if the Commanders' defense is going to kind of live up to the hopeful improvements that they've made, that kind of stuff. So there's going to be a little bit of unknown heading into that. But playing in Spain, I believe for the first time ever, that's
Yep.
going to be great. I've been to a soccer stadium in Spain for a soccer game. Outstanding atmosphere. Personally, I prefer it to the English soccer atmosphere. Um, and I think if they could bring that energy, I think that's gonna be great. So that is a good game. I saw it was like CBS ranked the international games, and I think that was tied for first. I forget what the other one was, but I mean, in terms of excitement, I think that's up there. So that's going to be good. But I think for the most part, we're treating some of these international viewers to some of our dregs in terms of matchups. So that's unfortunate. But there are some pretty good games out there on the schedule that should. Last year's NFL schedule was one of the better ones I've seen in a long time. There were a bunch of weeks where we had exciting games in the afternoon or primetime slots like every week, which I don't recall happening for the previous several seasons. Some of the best games were in the noon slot in previous seasons. So I don't know if we're going to beat last year, but I think this year is shaping up to be pretty good.
Now, but based off what you just said, does that mean that you're a Jets fan based on how the scheduling was last year because of how many primetime games they had?
Oh God, that was brutal. Oh my gosh. I was listening to an old episode of my own podcast because I'm not a narcissist. Um, but I was actually it was about the Miami Dolphins, because I was curious about what people thought about Tua's likelihood of being able to play a full season, and I was like searching around, and someone had linked my podcast episode where I kind of ranted a little bit about how people were overreacting to Tua not choosing not to wear a Guardian cap. I think that it's a non-story, and people were too angry about it. But I listened to that portion of the episode, and gosh, I forgot where I was going with this point. I already got lost
You
in
were
the
saying something about the Jets.
yeah, yeah. And right after that, so I listened to that portion of the episode, and right after that, we hit the mailbag, and a listener asks us another question, and my host James Pagashnik, who's great, goes off for like 15 minutes about how much he hates the fact that the Jets had all these primetime games, and I totally forgot that had happened because I had like blocked it out of my memory. Right? He was just so mad. He goes, it was the very next question too. He was so mad, and he's like, I think I understand why Jets fans are the way that they are because they have to watch this all the time. And I get it now because I also have to watch it all the time. It was just brutal. It was so bad. So hopefully, we don't get that again.
Yeah, and obviously with the international games, it's obvious that the NFL is buying into Justin Jefferson and the kind of Hollywood aspect of the NFL, with Justin being the kind of symbol. And the quarterback's not really having a. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes is his own animal internationally, but I think that's where Jaden Daniels comes into play and helping the kind of new age of
Yeah.
quarterback. But that being said, I want to talk about the draft class for Washington before we go any further. What did you think about the overall haul, and what would you say is your most favorite pick
Yeah, so I think when I graded the draft class, I had Washington second or third or something like that.
overall?
Yeah, yeah. Well, so
Wow.
like what I do is I have the consensus big board where I gather all of the data from over 100 analysts to value all the picks and stuff like that, and then I do like a return over investment. So I take the amount of capital that went into the pick, and I look at the capital that came out of the pick, and I just looked it up. Washington was second overall. Now, part of it is, of course, they only had like I think five picks, right?
Yeah.
So you only have to nail like two of them to have a
Okay.
really high return on investment. And I think obviously it really liked the cornerback. It was Trey Amos. That's it.
Yep.
It really liked the cornerback that they selected because I think he was like 36th, 38th ranked on the consensus board. A lot of people, especially near the end of the draft season, had put him in the first round. In fact, I actually saw a couple of Washington Commanders first round mocks that gave Trey Amos to them. So I think getting that guy kind of later on in the second, I think was a really great move for Washington. After that, again, there was only like five picks. After that, I think who else did they add that was a really good? It wasn't Jalen Lane, although I personally like that pick.
Josh Connerly in the first round.
Connerly was seen as a little bit of a reach, and then the
Okay.
grading system I used washed it out because it was like, well, it's a little bit of a reach, but it was a position of extreme need, and there weren't that many tackles left, I believe, and so the
Smart.
whatever spreadsheet I'm using takes all of that into account. So it was
That's
like
smart,
that
dude.
that's a wash. Um, so it was okay with the pick. I think it was Ja'Cory Cross-Merritt. It
Okay.
really liked that pick. And I think that was just because so like the system I use has like a discount. So if you take a running back or a punter or a kicker or somebody that's typically not drafted high at that position, there's a bit of a discount. And despite that, it's still like the pick because of how high ranked Krosky Merritt was. And I was able to watch him at the Shrine Bowl when I went down there, and he
Okay.
stood out to a bunch of the evaluators that I was watching. Not just because he's a talented runner, of course, but I think also how quickly he picked up on being able to have to handle protections and stuff like that. Not that I think that that's going to be a huge responsibility of his, especially early on, but like
Right.
knowing that he kind of knows what his job needs to be on non-running downs, I think is kind of huge. So I think that that was nice. Kane Medrano, I personally like, just because I mean, you probably already have talked about this endlessly, but I mean, his combine was insane.
Yeah.
It was outstanding athleticism. I was able to talk to somebody who worked at UCLA in their football operations department, and I was like, "Hey, so this Medrano guy, because this is just when I was doing like pro day and workout analysis. So this Medrano guy like really stood out because I try to make sure that the pro day scores that I'm producing are indexed to the workouts that matter the most for the position. So,
Okay.
it kind of doesn't matter if like an offensive lineman runs, a great 40-yard dash, but a 20-yard split kind of matters. The three cone and the short shuttle super matters.
Yes.
And so I do the same thing for every position, right? And so at linebacker, the broad jump matters a lot because you need to have a lot of explosiveness. It kind of signals your ability to uncoil through your hips and stuff like that. The 20-yard split matters. Medrano kind of killed all of the workouts, and so I asked about him, and my understanding of Medrano is that he's a hard worker, right? I think that there's like more that he needs to do. Again, this is me. I didn't watch him. I talked to somebody who had worked kind of with the football department closely. Um, but there's a lot more that he needs to do in order to kind of be a capable starting linebacker, but he should be able to contribute on special teams immediately, and you want those super athletes on special teams. It's what produces field position on kickoff coverage and stuff like that. So if he can tackle, which it sounds like he can, then you can kind of build up all of these other skills to make sure his eyes move quickly enough to be able to play from scrimmage. So I like that. Jalen Lane, pretty reasonable athlete. Um, Again, this was one where the system didn't super love the pick. He was picked 128th. He was ranked 157th. So, there is some stuff there. I'm not too worried about the Washington receiver group. So,
Yeah.
it's not like a huge issue. But that was kind of the area where it was like, I don't know about that. But for the most part, with only 5 picks, nailing two of them really well and getting another guy that you kind of like, I think that it ended up being a really reasonable draft class. And again, the spreadsheet doesn't know anything system ranked them second because they only had 5 picks and nailed two of them, and that's better than most teams get to do. So,
Hmm.
setting themselves up, not a ton of new talent coming in, but it's better to have quality than quantity sometimes. And so I think that Washington is kind of harvesting the resources appropriately.
Yeah, and obviously, the Harris regime and Adam Peters talked about analytics and having a new state of the art kind of analytic database to be able to measure these guys and put value on them. Obviously, they must have something similar to yours, and I think it's incredibly smart that it balanced the need with it because like typically whenever guys do this, they immediately just go with it was a reach without just the context involved, right? And I think that was very smart by you or whoever designed it to implement that. I think that's very, very smart. But to bring this to the team, Arif, did Washington do enough to be able to compete for the division?
Compete for sure. I
A
wouldn't make them
legitimate
favorites.
chance to win the
Yes.
division.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't make them favorites, obviously,
Right.
but certainly I think that they've got a really good shot to do that, especially because like you take a look at Washington and you say, hey, like what do they need, right? Well, they definitely need offensive line help. Well, they certainly took care of that with the trade, with drafting Connerly. So I think that there's movement there. They did want to make sure that they had a little bit more receiver help, but they handled that in other ways in the offseason, right? Getting Deebo Samuel, which I don't know how much he has left in the tank, if I'm being 100% honest.
Okay.
But even if you're like, hey, he's just going to be better Curtis Samuel, like, okay, great. That's fine. But Noah Brown, I thought was a sneaky, fantastic pickup. And so, like, his talk about analytics, his like numbers from last year are off the charts good. given the context of like the fact that the passing game regressed in Houston, and he had to take on additional rules as like Stephon Diggs got injured and stuff like that. So
He got a
um,
lot of flags called on his defenders whenever he was running down.
yeah,
As much as he didn't get catches, he was still
he
able
actually
to move the ball.
I think he was either first or second in the league in
Yeah,
penalty yards generated, and that includes not just DPI but like defensive holding and stuff like
right.
that. His first or second, and the first was Justin Jefferson. So
Of
like,
course.
not a bad place to be, right?
Right.
But yeah, I remember I ran a thing that because like what's really great about it used to be Football Outsiders, now FTN does this. They have that data, the yards produced from penalties. Um, I ran that and then I realized they only did DPI and Jefferson got called for like a lot of defensive holding. And so I went through the NFLpenalties.com database. I put all of that together and I added up all of those yards together. If I'm being honest, I did it to make Justin Jefferson look better than Jamar Chase, which that did work. Uh, but who popped out was Noah Brown for being able to do that, and he moved up really significantly in terms of production as a product of that. And I think receivers absolutely deserve credit for that. So that's a really good place to be. I know KJ Osborne, they added to him. He was a disappointment last year
Yeah.
for New England. And you look at that receiving group and you're like, why isn't he the best receiver there? And I
Right.
get it, but he was really good for the Vikings as a wide receiver three, really outstanding for the Vikings as a wide receiver three. And so I wouldn't be shocked if something positive came from there. Adding Michael Gallup, that's a good flyer to take. I'm probably less optimistic about Luke McCaffrey than a lot of people, but I would be lying if I didn't say that's a great, wide receiver 3-4 situation to have him there. That's outstanding. So that's a really good place to be. So I like the offense. I think kind of defensively, you do have to wonder, like, well, I mean, I don't like Javon Kinlaw. I mean, everyone would talked about how that was a poor signing, so I don't have to go into that. But um, I feel like there's a lot more work there to do. There's guys that it's like, well, I'm glad you took a chance on him, but I don't know if he's going to be great. Like Eddie Goldman, right? Near the
Right.
end of his career, he's had an outstanding career. I should know, watching him play, against the Vikings for so long. Dietrich Wise, same thing. Really good career. I don't know if he still has enough left in the tank. Bobby Wagner, same thing. It's like I don't know,
True.
but I like Frankie Louvu a lot, obviously. Adding Marshawn Lattimore, having Trey Amos, like there's pieces there. I think there's more work that they need to do before I can say, hey, this is a really great spot for you to be to win the division. But I certainly think with an offense like that, you've got a chance, right? And I think you've got a really good chance. And I like them for the first time in a while. I like them more than the Cowboys.
Ooh.
And I mean, obviously more than the Giants. It's not,
Yeah.
but it's like the Cowboys have on paper have looked really good for the past couple of years, and while they haven't materialized that, right? This is one of the first times in a while where I can say Washington, at least on paper, looks like a more enticing or compelling team than the Cowboys does. So definitely, I think probably the Vegas market probably has them second in odds, and I think that's appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the people are already saying the NFC East possibly the most competitive division in the NFL. Obviously, the NFC North. Me and my co-host said last episode, obviously takes the cake, and the AFC North is right behind it. You can make the argument for us probably around 3 there for the NFC East. But to wrap this up, Arif, I only have a couple more questions for you.
Sure.
The first one being, oh my gosh, I just had Trey Hendrickson. This has been a debacle going on this whole offseason, of course, and this is something that Washington fans wanted to have happen early on in the offseason. Now we're in May, and Trey Hendrickson is at camp. He's not practicing, saying he's not going to play this year based on the disrespect of Zach Taylor texting him regarding the fines that come with not being able to not participating in practice. What do you think happens with Trey Hendrickson, and what do you think? How much would it take to get it done?
Um, I'm shocked. I mean, I'm not shocked, right? Like it's the Bengals, they do this, but like if any other NFL team did it, except for maybe the Cardinals, I'd be shocked, right?
Right.
Um, it was interesting, like when this was announced, a bunch of people, and it's Twitter, who knows like how representative it is. People like to be mad, but how many people took the Bengals side? And I was like, the Bengals ranked 32nd in player treatment, right? Which is
Wow.
actually, hey, another reason to be so happy about the Harris Commanders, right? They just like
Right.
rocketed up the charts.
Yeah,
But
like Josh Harris said, he's not an F minus guy.
exactly. And so it's not shocking that that kind of happened, but like the Bengals have been better about this in the past, not paying their players. They're always bad at that, but at least trading away the players that they don't feel like they can pay. Like uh, Jesse Bates and Von Bell, they let kind of both of them go. They're like, hey, we got Dax Hill coming up, which like, okay, fine.
Yeah.
Um, and like they know they got to pay Burrow and they know they got to pay Chase and they just don't have the cash flow to offer the guarantees to people that they might want to do. And so like this kind of thing happens. But like you need to be kind of aware of who you can't take care of and find alternate means of resolving that. And they should have traded Hendrickson. Washington would have been a fantastic situation for him to end up in. And I think Hendrickson is mostly right. I think that when you take a look at these deals, you see that the final year of these deals is typically fake. Players are almost never expected to play on them,
Right.
and so the kind of acknowledgement, the agreement that you come to when you sign these contracts. I understand it's a contract, and literally the signed thing matters more, but he can exercise his leverage, which is not to show up. Um, and he's also right that it's like, hey, if I only had 3 sacks last year, the Bengals would have cut me,
Right.
right? And I didn't. I ruled. And so I should, get paid for doing that. I should get the other side of that security because I was exposed to the risk and now I don't get access to the reward. And I think that sucks for the Bengals. And so if the ball's in their court, they can choose to pay me or not, but I'm going to exercise my leverage. Now, getting mad about Zach Taylor, I don't know if it was because Taylor chose to text him specifically, and
Sure.
that method of communication was disrespectful, which I would understand. But he also like doesn't have a choice to find him. That
Right.
is in the CBA. He
Yeah.
has to find him. And he can't forgive the fine either. It's in the CBA. It's one of the things the players gave up to get other concessions. And
It's all about the treatment, being a
yeah,
veteran, a possible superstar looked at, saying, "You can't call me, you got to text
yeah.
me," sort of thing. You know how it is.
Yeah, and if that's it, I totally understand that
Yeah.
because this is somebody you're trying to build a relationship with and
Right.
and foster a community. And like last year, the Bengals didn't think that they'd be able to bring so many people back together. I don't know if you remember 2 years ago, it was Jermaine Pratt who said, "God, I can't believe my life," because after they'd like failed in the playoffs, and I don't know if it was Jermaine Pratt's fault or something, a
It
different
was.
linebacker.
I remember
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah, yeah.
coming off the field, walking to the locker room. Yeah, I
Yeah,
remember
people
that.
were like yelling at each other, right? And
Yeah.
someone was yelling at me, and it was like my last year here. I can't believe it. And so everyone just kind of expected a lot of these players to leave, and that was an expectation for a lot of people, and I think fairly so. And they managed to keep that group together. And the fact that you can't respect the leaders in that locker room enough to be able to kept that group together for I guess not another run, but the potential for another run is, I think, egregious. And I think, there's a lot of elements to managing a front office, a lot of elements to managing as a coach, right? That, we talk all about like, these scheme geniuses with like Shanahan, right?
Right.
And we talk about, like the people that have the ability to develop talent really well or whatever, right? And one of the things that's made Tomlin such a successful coach in the NFL, and I know, like, for whatever reason, Steelers fans are much more excited to see him go than I think anyone outside of Pittsburgh. They're like, what are you talking about?
They say
But
that my stepfather-in-law is a Steelers fan, and the one thing he complains about, he says that people say that Tomlin has lost the control of the locker room is one thing that they say. But
uh,
honestly, I would have told you, Arif, that even to this day, if it wasn't for Dan Quinn, I'd be sitting here saying I want Mike Tomlin.
yeah, yeah, and there's no question Tomlin is first ballot Hall of Fame coach.
Yeah.
Like, there's no, yeah. Um, and one of the reasons he's so good is because actually the opposite of, I'm
Right.
gonna disagree with your father-in-law here, the opposite of that, which is that he's outstandingly good at managing locker rooms full of volatile personalities to the point
Yep.
where they take risks on players who are known to be volatile personalities and they find ways to make it work. And when it stops working, they get rid of that player and get a really great deal out of it.
Yep.
I think the Chase Claypool deal, I think getting rid of like all the way back to like Mike Wallace,
AB.
Tony Brown. Yeah,
They
yeah,
did not wait. It took. I said to my Steelers buddies when he was like, there was an incident where he threw furniture off a roof, and I was like, he better chill because if he doesn't, Pittsburgh does not play with that sort of stuff. They'll get rid
yeah.
of you regardless of how good you are.
They give you a fairly long leash, and then when you're at the end of it, that's it.
Yeah.
Like your second chance was in the leash. Like you don't get
Right.
more warnings, you just get more leeway until you cross the line. And that's what happened to Pickens. And I thought that was a really great move, and I criticized the Antonio Brown move way back when it happened. I was like, man, if you can't manage it, the most talented receiver in the league, if you can't manage that, and obviously I was so wrong about that. And history is like borne out, when they continue to do that, it really does signal that this player is a really difficult player to manage within a locker room that really prioritizes culture and leadership. And I think that's what makes the Steelers good, and that's one issue that Zach Taylor may be having. Because in a lot of other respects, Taylor is a good coach. Again, another hire that I criticized that I was wrong about. He does a really good job in a lot of aspects of coaching. I think that his game management's not the best, but I think it's better than average, and that's a low bar to clear, but it's good to be there, right? His schematic control is really good. I think it's not necessarily his fault that the offensive line is garbage. That's the front office. And I think that he has adjusted to how bad that offensive line is in really excellent and smart ways. And I think a lot of people don't like account for that when you take a look at ski. And there's a lot of ways he's a good coach, right? This is not one of them. I think that the ability to manage a locker room and understand how players want to be communicated with is a really important element to being a good coach. And so that's why you have Tomlin extracting blood from a stone, these talentless teams that somehow go above 500 or whatever, right? The opposite of that is like Taylor has a super talented team, and he's one of the reasons that they're talented, of course, but they're underperforming, right? And so I think that this situation with Trey Hendrickson is a representative example of that, where maybe the Bengals just don't have the cash flow to make this happen. Maybe that's the case, right? That's very true for a lot of legacy teams whose ownership kind of have owned the team forever, right? Okay, and you can't offer the guarantees that he wants, and maybe he doesn't want rolling guarantees. So now you have two duties, one to the team and one to him. Now you have to make sure you position the team well. Trading before the draft does a better job of that because you can use those assets that year, right? And then second, you have a duty to him to put him in a situation because he's done a lot for you and now he doesn't get to
Right.
get paid for it. You might as well put him in a situation where he gets to succeed. And locker rooms notice that when you pay attention to what departing players might want and you take care of them in that regard, take less in a trade to put them in a situation they want, they notice that and they appreciate that. That's historically been, we've seen this in a lot of locker rooms. The Vikings have done it, right? And I know that that's been noticed and appreciated. And
I
so if
know
you don't
Trent
do that,
Williams signs off on that thought.
oh, I bet. I bet. But I mean, like, Kirk Cousins, right?
Right.
Um, I think that when you do that, people pay attention and it helps build your team in the long run. So, really sucks. I really take Hendrickson's point of view here. I think a lot more seriously than the teams. And it's a bad situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, respect for Zach Taylor after that Bengals game when Dax Hill called the Washington offense college-esque, and then Washington went into Cincy in that primetime game and won, and he said, look, we shouldn't be saying anything to the cameras and everything. I gained a lot of respect for him after that because it's hard to be able to, with all those egos in there, it's hard to do.
Yeah.
But Arif,
Yeah.
my last question for you. I've seen this a lot. Everyone does power rankings, and it's power rankings in May. It doesn't really matter. But last question for you: would you put Washington in your top 10 power rankings heading into the season?
That's interesting. I noticed that because I was looking at the NFC North power rankings, I noticed that the Packers and Vikings were like 8 and 9 or 9 and 10 or something like that. And I was like, yeah, sure, maybe. I would regard Washington as a team that's on a better trajectory than both of those teams, than both the Packers and the Vikings.
Really?
The Vikings, yeah, so the Vikings have a better defense, I think. I mean, that's not really a controversial statement, but I'm not a Jordan Love believer, one. And two, I would like to believe in JJ McCarthy, but I would need to see it, right?
Right.
Like he played really well in
Very
one
rational
preseason
as a
game.
Vikings fan of you.
Right.
Very
Yeah, right.
rational.
Like I think it's important, to kind of keep grounded there. And so I would say, there's probably a melange of teams, right, in like the 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 area. I would say Washington is in that group. And I would say
Okay.
probably above the Vikings and the Packers. Again, I might just be a huge Jordan Love hater, and that's not fair. But I think the Packers defense didn't improve the way that they wanted it to. I think that the offensive building is um, suspect. I'm also not a huge Matthew Golden fan, so I didn't like, oh, they finally drafted a wide receiver
Right.
one that I think is a wide receiver two. That's okay. Good job. You have 8 wide receiver twos. It's I'm not confident in the Packers. I'm not confident in the Vikings without that quarterback question being answered more definitively. And I am confident in at least the Washington offense. I'm concerned about that defense. So yeah, I would put them in the top 10. Maybe if I thought about it more, I'd put the Vikings and Packers above them. Maybe not. I don't know. But I think that they deserve to be there. I haven't looked where's Washington been put in these power rankings?
There's been some, like I think the 33rd team put them at like 3 overall, third, or it's like top 5. It was kind of, that's why I wanted to ask. I've just seen it a handful of times. I do think that's a little bit that by the end of the season I might agree with it, but I'm not going to go into the season because I know from the past here as a Washington fan, when they start talking good about you is when you expect bad things to happen, right? But that's just the way I've been conditioned as a Washington fan. But we're in the future now, of course. Arif, before you get out of here, would you like to plug your show and your social media handle, just in case anyone watching hasn't followed you yet, brother, and would like to?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter at Arif Hasan NFL. You can follow me on Blue Sky at arif.bsky.social. Or you can just check out my website, wideleft.football. I added a bunch of new writers there recently, and so I'm really excited about our ability to put a bunch of new content forward. I hope it's all, the high quality stuff that people like to read and pay for. So you can check it out at wideleft.football. But those are the only two socials I really use. So Arif Hasan NFL on Twitter, arif.bsky.social on Blue Sky.
And you said wide left football, right? .com?
Yeah. Wideleft.football.
Wideleft.football. Okay, my pastor of my church is a big Vikings fan, so I'm going to make sure to put him on to you and make sure he comes and checks
Really
it
appreciate
out.
that.
Of course. Arif, thank you so much for joining me, brother. I appreciate it, giving your intellect and national view, and being able to give us some what you think of Washington. Because a lot of this is Washington-based, so it's hard to get some good, honest answers. I'm glad that you were able to join me today and give me some of those.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course. Have a good day, brother. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you have a good one.
All right, everybody. We just spoke with the man, Mr. Arif Hasan. Appreciate Arif and his time, of course. Now, to wrap up this episode, let's answer some fan questions that were submitted that I asked for. I know we're running a little bit longer than usual, but we got a lot of great bits from Ryan Fowler and Arif Hasan. That was great to hear from them. They were very similar in the sense of what they thought of Kane Medrano. But I wanted to ask some of these fan questions that were submitted. And the first one we're going to go to is I'm trying to find it. I'm sorry. Hold on. All right, here we go. This is from Deluxe. Thoughts on bye week? If we end up with a late bye again, the formula is part alphabetical. Yeah, so I think the projected bye week is week 12 again, and a lot of people are going to say, oh, another late bye. But I'll say this. I would rather that week 12 bye than having an early week bye. And what I mean by that is, you saw what the projected last 4 games are. Or let's do last 6. After the bye week, week 13, versus Broncos, Sunday Night Football. At Minnesota, at New York, at Eagles, Dallas, and then home versus Eagles. That bye week actually is in a perfect location for Washington. Not only just given with the NFC East matchups that you have there, and that's going to be very important for you to possibly win the division, but also getting into the playoffs, of course, being able to knock a team out of contention, right? Like last year, the NFC North dominated the playoff picture, and so it was hard. Like you either had to win your division or have a really good record, which Washington was able to pull off and able to get in the playoffs. So those last 6 games are very crucial, and they're difficult. They're very good teams, and so having that bye week at week 12, I actually love it because it gives Washington a little bit of breather right before that stretch. Imagine if we had a week 5, week 6 kind of bye week with those last 6 games. You'd be looking at it and saying, man, that is one heck of a stretch to finish a season. Not really concerned about that. So as much as we want to poo-poo the late bye, we do have to look at it from the mindset of saying, all right, well then that case, it makes a lot of sense to be able to do that. Now the next question that we have in the Discord, this one is from Chris Comerton. With the Commanders playing their first ever regular season game in Spain against the Dolphins, how might the travel and unique environment impact their performance in that Week 11 contest? I've heard players and coaches compare it to a Super Bowl with all the extra media sessions, new facilities, environments, change of normal operations, etc. Yeah, you could definitely say it has the same sort of feel to a Super Bowl because you're traveling to a place that you're not normal or accustomed to, right? You don't have the normal week build up because you do have to dedicate to travel. We saw what they did last year against Arizona where they went out to Arizona State and practiced for that week against that Arizona matchup, which is going to be hard for Washington to do, obviously, because the week before that they play against Detroit at home. And so you could say, well, do they want to leave early and go and practice out in Spain. And of course, that's going to be a thing that you're going to, the Dan Quinn and company have to go over and think about. But the time aspect, I think I would be willing to bet they're going to go early that week, like immediately after the game, fly out to Spain, stay for the week. So that way you don't get the jet lag, the kind of weirdness. You kind of get used to the environment going in. But the media attention, all that is obviously something to take into consideration. And it's something that is going to possibly be a thing. But honestly, I think Jaden Daniels and company, they've kind of shown you, Chris, that they just take it as one game. It's just a football game in a different place, in a different stadium. Yeah, more people might talk to you, but at the end of the day, it's just football. And this is what you do. This is what you love. This is what God blessed you with in your talents. Just go out there and do your thing. And I think that at this point, we have shown and proven that ever since week 1 against Tampa Bay, I don't think this team gets nervous or fidgety or kind of anxious in that kind of regard. Like they are very even keel. They're in the moment, and they're willing to do whatever they need to do to get the job done. I don't think it's that big of a concern for this football team, to be honest, specifically because of the leaders that they have. And obviously, Bobby Wagner and company and Zach Ertz. But I think Jaden Daniels in particular, his kind of personality just is it's very unique, unicornish, you could say. It's not even a word. But just in the sense of, as a young man, not getting overly hyped. And obviously, your first game against Tampa, that's going to be a thing. But you could tell the guy just has ice in his veins, and we all know this at this point. So I think that given with the leadership of this team, the mindset they have, what the things that they've done in the past, like at Arizona, I think they're going to be able to do what they need to do to be able to squash any type of anxiety or anything like that, or the change of environment, if that makes any sense. Thank you, Chris. Next question is from Andy Lockhart in the UK. Oi! They're going to Spain. Only a 2.5-hour flight for them. I know Jeremy Reeves is going to be jealous of that, who said he did not like flying. Of course, I don't think he was complaining about having to go play in Spain. He said it was awesome. He just said, I don't like flying. He's a human. Give him some grace, babe. Now, the question from Andy in the UK. What do you say to the ticket sellers that when the usual group of us, 10 tickets, for week 1 of the last few years, are now unable to get tickets besides in the nosebleeds? I think there should be some sort of loyalty. I mean, I understand what you said. I mean, this is why you get Scott Hartley, Andy, the UK Fan of the Year. Try to rub some elbows, you know? That's why you guys took a picture of Goodell. You couldn't have said something like hook a brother up with some sweet tickets for week 1 of me and my boys so we can celebrate. Come on, that's what we need you guys for. But in all honesty, this isn't like this isn't a place where you can go and barter and try to get the tickets down. They're going to want as much money as possible, especially with the new stadium in D.C. coming. How much money they have funded, $3.5 billion for that stadium. They're going to need money, man. And, of course, this is what Washington, this is what we have all said. When they start winning games, it's going to be expensive, right? And I know this. I've reconciled with it. It's okay. Instead of going to 3 or 4 games a year, you're only going to be able to go to 1. All right. It doesn't take anything away from you, right? At the end of the day, you would love that loyalty. But we also have to remember that Washington is an absolute juggernaut of a fan base. Dominate everything. Away games, dominate. We saw that last season. When they win games, doing it. Social media, dominate, right? That's just what they do. This is going to happen. The prices are going to rise. And it's okay, because when Washington deserves that. And Josh Harris and company, for how much they've put into this franchise, they deserve that. That's how you should be looking at it. Of course you want that loyalty, but Josh Harris, Mark Ine, Magic Johnson could say the same thing to you. Where's the loyalty in what we've done and be able to provide a good football team, a good environment, a good structure, a good culture for you to be as a fan compared to 30 years before that, right? All I'm saying is I understand what you're saying, that the loyalty aspect of it. You've been going to games. You've been coming from the UK for years, even when we were trash. I totally get it. I totally do. But at the end of the day, what they realize is if they give it out to 1, there's going to be more that want that loyalty. And there's a list of people, probably tens of thousands of people long, that could say that they are loyal and they deserve it, right? But that, at the end of the day, it's got to take the hits, man. It's okay. It's all right. I know it's expensive for you boys. I get it. I'm just excited to see your ugly mug when you come over here to the U.S. again so I can whoop your ass to some pool. All right, everybody. That's going to wrap us up for this episode. I don't believe I have any more fan questions. I know that we've gone longer than typical. So I just want to appreciate if you made it this far. You're a frickin' champion. I can't thank you enough. Thank you to Ryan Fowler. Thank you to Arif Hasan for joining us and giving us their great thoughts and insight into the team and overall into the NFL. Thank you, Andy Lockhart. Thank you, Chris Comerton, for your questions. And thank you, Arch, as well. If you guys want to be on the show, just reach out. We love to hear from you guys. We want to hear about your background and your fandom and what you do and what your thoughts on some fan questions. Would love to hear from you guys. We'll see you again on Sunday evening. Thank you for tuning in. I really do appreciate for listening to my stupid voice. All right, everybody. We'll see you again on Sunday. Washington football. Woo! What's up, everyone? This is Kyle from the Burgundy Zone. We are releasing our own merch to support the show. If you want to rock the Burgundy Zone logo or you want to see Reed's face on your shirt, we got it. We're starting with t-shirts, hoodies, and zip-up. So if you're a fan of the show, make sure you snag one before they are gone. Check out the link in our bio on Instagram, or you can find the link in the description of the video. Thanks again for all your support. Until next time.